Professor K here. No more theory, no more going through all of the why things work. We're just going to go ahead and start right on the recipe for disaster, and I'm going to show you what positioning techniques I use to position some of these items in here and why, without going into any more demos on the simple level. So now that you've got an understanding of positioning, of different layout options, now it's time to actually get in here. All right, so with my recipe intro title, today I am going to use margin for this. The reason why is because I want this space to be respected. I don't want to have this, like if I were to position this absolute and say top negative 50 pixels, I see it's like really hard to get this to do the thing that I want. I could try like a position relative. That might actually not be a bad idea. All right, so this is getting closer. Let's do a top negative 100 pixels. How about 120 or 150? 150 is perfect. Okay, so this is in the right place now. But look at this. Now I've got this big old empty space below it. So I want something that like doesn't leave this extra space. Remember with position relative, the space is like respected. And what's going to happen is that if you position something relative, the same like space, it almost leaves like this like kind of like ghost space here that you then have to deal with. So then it's like, okay, well, how do I move this up? And it's just a real pain in the butt. So position isn't what we want here. We want something that will move things up and around, but while kind of like dragging the rest of the content with us. So in that case, all we have to do is use this little trick that I learned actually pretty recently after I got to BU, and that's a negative margin. So negative margins can kind of scoot things around without leaving that extra space. Let's do a margin, and just on the top, a negative margin with that same value, 150 pixels. Check this out, it doesn't leave that extra space. That's because margin actually drags the element up and positions it just the way that you want here. So I'm going to use that layout technique, a negative margin. I'm just going to adjust it here so that it's kind of in the right spot. This is still a little too high. Maybe 90 pixels would be better. For 80, oh, that's better. The other thing I'm missing here is a background. So I'll just put a background FFF on it. There we go, much better. And one other thing that I can see is that this is not cut off quite the way that I want it to. I want it to shift a little bit left. So I don't care so much about the space being respected here. I don't want like anything to the right to kind of like move in. So this time I actually am going to use a position relative. And then I am going to change my left positioning to like a negative, let's say 50 pixels. No, too much. Let's try 20. Much better. All right, that's looking really great. What's this stuff on the outside? Why is there this little border on the outside? Let's take a look. If I just kind of hover over in here and just take a look. Huh, my body has some extra stuff going on. That yellow, if I remember, is a margin. But I'm going to double check my layout just to be sure. Sure enough, it comes with a default margin on it. So let's fix that. Up here on the body tag, we're just going to add a margin of 0. Oh, much better. Right up against the edge, just like what I wanted. None of this extra white space here. However, that also means that everything else on the inside is now getting this kind of extra around it, this like right up against the edge. So let's see here. Well, we've got a description and a couple of sections that I think we can utilize here to give us a nice amount of space. So let's say that with our, do we have a description yet? No. Recipe intro title, dot recipe intro description, and I want a space on the inside, padding of 1em, just at a minimum. Yeah, that's looking better. I might even do like 1.5M just to, oh, much, much better. Give it a little breathing room. And that actually looks a little tall at the top here. It's a little much. So with my recipe intro title, I want this space to disappear. I want to close up this space. I don't really want to mess with this padding 1.5M though. One option I have is to utilize the margin again, margin this time bottom, and try a negative value there. So let's try negative 50 pixels. Negative margins are really great at closing up spaces. That obviously was too much, but let's try maybe like negative 10. Still too much. Oh, you know what? I bet this has a margin at the bottom. Let's try a margin bottom of 0. Ah, check that out. You know why it has a margin bottom? It's because it's an H1. H1s always have a margin bottom. All right, let's try 10 pixels. We didn't even need to use the negative margin there. We just needed to adjust it a little bit. All right, so what's next? This space feels good. This ingredients maybe does not feel as good. Let's take a look at what's going on there. What's my class I want to adjust? Recipe ingredients. And now this has a padding of 10 pixels. That's not enough. Let's change this to the same amount as we used in the recipe intro description, 1.5M. Oh, there we go. Nice and even. Check that out. Much improved. Now this is like a little far over, so I just want to bump this over just a little bit extra. So with my recipe ingredients list, I want it to respect the space. So respect the space, use position relative, and then I am going to change the left positioning. I'm going to bump it over a little bit. So here, just going in alphabetical order, I'm going to put left, and then because we're positioning our padding in M's, I'm going to do this in M's too. So let's do 1M just to see how it goes. It's maybe a little bit too much. 0.75M, how about that? Still a little too much. Sometimes you just play with things. Yeah, there we go. That feels right. And it's not getting cut off over here, which is important. All right, so what's up next? We have an ingredients container, and in our mock-up, it respects the space. It's going all the way to the bottom, or in our code, but we actually don't want it to respect the space of this list. We want it to kind of collapse and go just around ingredients and not around this entire list. So remember the trick we could use? What layout technique doesn't respect the space of something? There's a couple you could think of. Absolute positioning, right? But we played with absolute positioning earlier, and one thing that does is, let's take a look at that actually. Recipe ingredients list. Let's just double check here and make sure that we've got the right thing here. All right, cool. Well, for one thing, we'd lose our position relative with the left here. Let's try absolute. So this is going to cover up all the content below it. That's not quite what we want. We don't want it to disrespect the space that much. We just want it to disrespect it a little. So let's go back to our layout behaviors. And what do we have here that we could use? What kind of looks right? Well, check this out. Floats do what we want. They respect the space. This flex box, you see it's not like overlapping this flex box, this title here. So it's respecting the space, but the parent container isn't. So let's try this. Let's just use this to our advantage. So going in alphabetical order, float left. Doesn't really matter whether it's left or right, but left is handier. And now we can see that this is definitely no longer respecting the space. But the next container is stretching up into it. So directions is stretching up in just like we want. So that's a great use of float in like a way that it was never really intended to be used. So let's see what this gap here is about. Just go ahead and inspect element. This is inside an iframe, An iframe is a really common technique in code editors. And it's kind of like this little encapsulated HTML that doesn't have anything else to it. So what have we got here? We've got a section, we've got padding but no margin. Padding but no margin, that's a little silly. I wonder if it's something inside here that's doing it. So this, aha, look, this has margin. Recipe ingredients list does. So let's try taking that off. Let's try margin of 0 and see if that gets rid of that extra. No, surprisingly not. Well, you know what, it got rid of some, just not all of it. I wonder why. Do each of these? Oh, those have a little bit of margin on them. I don't really want to get rid of all that though. So instead of mucking around with this more, I'm going to focus on positioning this up closer to the ingredients, because that's actually what I want here. So here I want to position this up closer to the ingredients, and I also want to get this out and unoverlapped from directions. So here I actually want to preserve the space that this list is using. So position relative is a good option here. I'm going to do a negative top negative 20 pixels. All right, that's looking better. How about 25? Ah, much better. And now is no longer mucking with directions. I'm also going to take out this margin because it's really not, it's not doing us any help. The margin puts it, gives a little more space around directions, so I'm just going to keep that there. And then just bump this up to 50. Much better. Oh, we still didn't get rid of our space problem though, huh? Oh, look at this. I figured it out. What's that? It's a margin. But where's the margin coming from? It's coming from directions down here. So why does that happen? Why is this element all the way down here affecting all the way up here? Well, with floats, again, the space is kind of disrespected, right? The space of this recipe ingredients list, right, is no longer respected. But that means the next thing down is going to try and float up to take its space. So right here, this recipe directions is like kind of making some space inside of this recipe directions title is making space inside of recipe directions. So if we close this up, if we remove the margin top on this, in fact, we can even try it out here. Check that out. It closes right up. Perfect. So now we know that we just need to go to recipe directions title. We've even got that down here. Just do a margin dash top of 0. And it's okay if you, there's a lot of different positioning techniques happening here. It's okay if you don't pick the perfect one at first. Just by trying these out, you're going to get a good sense of how they work. So that gets us much closer. All right, what's next? We need padding again. This looks familiar. Starting to get like a good feel for this. All right, so what have we got here? We've got our recipe directions, and in our recipe directions, we want padding of 1.5 m. We're gonna keep it real consistent. And then just scroll back down, double check. Oh, much better. Oh, but now these are like not going all the way to the edge like we wanted in the mock-up. Bummer. All right, well, here's the first thing we can do. Firstly, what we're going to do is we're actually going to take off this list style, and we're going to put it back later. Don't worry, it'll come back. But for right now, I just want to like not worry about this. We're going to use a different way to put these numbers in. So under our recipe directions cards, let's just like double check that that's what we want here. So recipe directions, we're going to expand this out and then scroll up. So here's title and here's OL recipe directions cards. Perfect. That's what we want to style. Let's inspect this and see what's happening here. Why is there extra space happening around here? There's a little bit of margin. There's no margin on this, so we don't have to worry about it. There's a marker. So let's just try this out. Let's try list style type. Let's try turning that to none again. Well, that kind of helps, but it doesn't help with expanding this out. So what could we do to expand this out? Well, one trick that we have up our sleeve, again, is negative margins. The cool thing about negative margins is they actually like expand out the width. So I'm gonna do a negative margin of the same amount as my padding was above. So here, I'm just going to do, actually M comes before P, so we'll do margin 0 for top and bottom, negative 1.5 M for left and right. So that's the shorthand. Top and bottom, left and right. Let's see how that goes. There we go. All nice and close to the sides again. To compensate for that, on our recipe directions card, in the description, we are going to add the padding back in. Padding 1.5 M. That might be actually too much when we go look at it. Yeah, it's kind of a lot. Is that really what we want? Maybe, because the one's going to take up space there. What's happening? Why is there so much space between this and this? Let's inspect the element and see. Oh, there's a margin top on here. Look, you can see layout, margin, top. And take that out, that makes it a little bit better. Does the image have like a margin on it? Yeah, just a little bit, because it's display inline, and that means it gets some automatic margin with it. So let's do a thing here. Let's grab this recipe card image, and let's change the display to block so that it doesn't have that kind of funky extra space along it. Okay, that helps. And then we're also going to do, on recipe card's description, we're just going to do margin 0 instead of just margin top. That's much better. And then on here, let's see. So display block, let's check our layout, no extra anything there. There's still a little bit of space, but I can't explain why. What a bummer. All right, well, in that case, no big deal. We're still pretty close. So this actually gets us like 95% of the way there. We're going to deal with these markers separately. But what I do want to do is like style this last enjoy before we move on to that. So here under recipe directions end, and then recipe directions end description, we're going to do something a little bit different. So we're going to style that class. This actually needs the same type treatment as an H1, roughly. I can see. It's got that same kind of like large feel, so I'm just going to go with that first. So from our H1, I'm just going to steal everything but the text shadow because we didn't want that. Oops. Fix our indentation. Okay. And now at the bottom, we don't want to respect the space at all here. We want to position this absolutely, and we want it to be to this element. So, inspecting the element, let's just see where we're at. We've got recipe directions end, and then recipe directions end description. So let's rough out our CSS in the inspector. Let's do a position absolute, and then top, let's do 50%. Okay, well, it's no longer at the bottom here. Cool, but where'd it go? And if I scroll up, oh, it's right here. Why is it right here? Well, without something to look at above, it's going to remember that position absolute goes all the way up as far as it can go until it finds something that it can position to. In this case, it went up as far as it could go, HTML, and said, okay, I'm going to position myself 50% from the top because that's what you asked me to. I'm like, no, 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 that's not where I want you to position to. I want you to position to what? What do I want it to position to? Not this. It's not even like a parent. recipe directions end. That looks like what I want. All right, so from recipe directions end, let's fix this up. We're going to add just a real simple position relative. And that is going to be the key. Check this out. Now it's kind of back where we want it to. And if we do position absolute, top 50%. Let's check this down here. Much better. All right, so this has got some stuff going on. Let's inspect. Why is it not top 50%? All right, well, first of all, it's got a big old margin on it. So let's fix this up by removing the margin, margin 0. In fact, we could do margin 0 auto. Let's see if that gets it in the middle. Nah, sometimes that centers it. Margin 0, let's do a text align center. Nope, that didn't do anything. Width 100%. There we go, now we're making some progress. So why do we need to put the width 100% here? When you position something absolutely, it actually only takes up the space it needs to, just like a float. That's because it's disrespecting the flow. So put a 100% back on it. Now you can have it take up 100% of the width and align it to the center. So let's put these here. And again, margin 0. And then get those all nice and neat. Oh, so much closer. So this is literally, now you can see it's literally 50% from the top. So now we need to compensate for this by just bumping it up a little bit more. And how much do we need to bump it up more by? It's actually, we need it by like half the height of this font size. So I'm just going to do, you can overwrite properties. I'm going to do a margin top of negative and then half the m's, right? So 2.45. No. Let's do math not in our heads. 3.9 divided by 2 is 1.95. I shouldn't be trusted to do math by myself. It's not a good idea. All right, let's see if that does it. That's my theory. Oh, too much. All right, let's just go with a pixel value for the sake of simplicity. I'll do 90 pixels. Still too much. I'm going to work this out in my inspector just so that it doesn't keep refreshing on me. There we go. That's much better. And this still like doesn't feel centered because it's italicized. So I'm even gonna just do that last little touch. I'm gonna do a negative text indent, negative 0.5 em. Oh, much better. Okay, so negative 37 pixels on my margin, and then a text indent to compensate for that italicized text, really make it look perfect. Excellent. And we're going to grab this red here because it's red from the mock-up. Oh, we're getting so close. This is looking so good. We're just going to set the color to that. Very close. Oh, we're so close here. In fact, the only thing that we don't have perfect here is this image. So in our index.html, there's actually an image here, and this is a PNG, so it's transparent, which means that we can do some fun stuff with it to make it overlap. So we're on this element, just this one. We're going to do a max width of none. Then we're going to do a width of 110%. And just kind of bump that up a little bit. You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking this should have been the absolutely positioned element. But let's kind of let this go. All right, so width 124%. Let's do a margin left of negative 20 pixels. Actually, we can do it percentage-wise, can't we? 12.5%. And we'll do this at 125. Do you see why I chose that number and not a different number? It's because it's half of the extra from the 100%. So a little bit less than half makes it nice and centered. So if we were to do 150 and negative 25%, that would even be closer to what's in our mock-up. So that would be perfect. And then let's do, we wanted a little bit of this to overlap up here. You see how this PNG kind of goes over the section? Let's make that happen. So I'm going to use a margin top for that, negative 10%. There we go. Check that out. Look, it brought up the image, but it didn't bring up everything else. Let's do, I wonder if a position relative would be better here. Top, negative 10%. That didn't do anything. You know what? You can just adjust it in both places. That'll be just fine. So I'm just going to copy my stuff and paste this into my recipe directions and image. Recipe directions and image. Paste. And we did not want the absolute positioning. That wasn't very helpful for us. And now to kind of finish this off, we just need to position this a little bit differently. So let's use the margin top for that. Let's, oh, good guess, 57 pixels. 57 pixels. Much better. Now, what do we have here? We have a scroll bar at the bottom. So something out here is like, this is like got some extra overlap, and so does this. So when this happens, we don't want this like extra horizontal scroll, because on mobile it could be like really finicky. So the property you can use here to fix this is called overflow. And you can change the overflow, how stuff overflows in the container, using either an X value or a Y value or both. You might be like, huh, I remember this from when you had the float demo earlier. Remember how I used an overflow hidden here to get this float container to kind of like respect things? Same property. But in this case, we want to use it for its intended purpose, which is to say, I want to hide everything overflowing on the x-axis so that we don't get this scroll bar. So let's start with recipe directions first. Recipe-directions, overflow-x hidden. Let's see. That's an improvement. It's no longer overflowing here, but we've still got this list hanging out in ingredients. So let's try the same thing on ingredients. Overflow X hidden. Scroll bar gone! Mission accomplished! Perfect. All right, so we are in a great place here. No! What happened? Do you see what happened? Look what came back. Oh, darn. Oh, that's such a bummer. Okay. All right. So there's a funny GIF. Remember how overflow kind of fixes layout things? Well, apparently it fixed the trick that we used earlier. All right, so what could we do instead? Well, one thing that we could do is up on the body tag, we could say for everything, hide the X overflow. And that would do the same thing. Oh, that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. So it's funny how things in CSS can work like that. The same things that give you things can also take them away. So just keep an eye on your CSS, and as you make changes, double check they're doing what you're expecting. Because sometimes when you do some of these funkier things like this, it will surprise you. So that's how I got my Your Favorite Recipe project styled for mobile. Phew, lots of work, huh? But it's looking great now. I'm so happy with it. And I'm really excited to show you how all these things come together in this final assignment. So now that hopefully you have your mobile view styled, the next part of this assignment is really to start saying, okay, what do I need to do differently at my tablet and desktop sizes? And when we get into that, we're going to take a look at things like media queries and responsive design. So that's what you have to look forward to next. But for now, focus on really tying down these mobile styles and getting into those details, really getting it exactly like it should look like. I'll see you later.